Allan Thygesen is the CEO of Docusign. Very excited to say we get to sit down with the man himself one-on-one just a day or so after the earnings calls for the company for Q3. Allan, thanks for being here. Congrats on a great quarter.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's good to see you.
Of course, yeah, you as well. So billings, obviously, I think top of mind, and I think largely moving the stock today up some 27%. Obviously, the stock is up 87% year to date, but also significant numbers on subscriber revenue, new customers, all increasing for the quarter. The guidance part is interesting to me. Why are you projecting a further boost to billings for Q4, Allan?
Well, I think what we're projecting is improvement over what we had previously projected, which I think logically follows from the strength that we saw in Q3, but a little bit of a normalization since we had some earlies that boosted our billings a little extra normally this quarter. But overall, I think the business has positive momentum. Combination of strength with our install base, with our existing products that everyone's familiar with, and our digital channels performing better and better, and then we've launched this whole new product suite we can probably talk a little about called Intelligent Agreement Management, initially to mid-market customers, and that's going very well.
Yeah, talk to me more about the rollout of IAM, like you said, Intelligent Agreement Management. I know you've been using AI for different ways over the last few years, but talk to me about how that process has changed and what most excites you about where IAM is today.
Yeah, so yes, we have been using AI, so lots of folks have probably used our products for signature, right? And when we're recognizing the fields, for example, where you're supposed to type your name or your address or whatever, that's all driven by AI. When we do identity verification, that's all AI driven. But with the advent of all the recent changes in LLMs, we've just seen such a massive acceleration in capability. And one of the things that current AI is really good at is evaluating unstructured text and extracting information. If you think about all the consumer use cases for that. And that is the perfect application for agreements. So agreements today are stored as unstructured data, Word files or PDF files. And we can, with AI, extract the essential information. Who are the parties? When was the agreement entered into? When does it renew? What are the notice periods? What are payment terms? And these are things that are simply not available today. And we can give that insight to everyone from your CFO to the finance leader to sales leaders to frontline sellers can understand when are their agreements up for renewal, what terms might they want to renegotiate at that time. That's proving to be super valuable, and that's all AI driven.
What most excites you about what AI can do for the company, even in the next 12 months, that may be things you haven't been able to even do just yet? Obviously, as we're seeing this huge proliferation of LLMs and we're seeing this widespread adoption in ways we couldn't even really imagine, at least those of us on the outside 12 or 18 months ago.
Yeah. So I think the example I just gave is one. Another example is, in almost any size, any type of company, you get agreements from other parties. And then you want to look at it and say, okay, which things are maybe out of spec with what I normally would agree to? We can do all of that automated with AI. And we actually just released a product that does that. And so that's helpful for companies of all sizes. And often that review is a huge bottleneck in getting started with new customers or prospects. So that's another example. I think we'll see more rollouts of that. I think the next step is automating the drafting and negotiating of agreements, as in an assisted way initially, but still. And then ultimately, you could imagine entire agreement workflows being fully automated. Why is there all this human touch in, let's say, completing an NDA? Why isn't that just sent, edited, resolved, and filed all without any human touch? That's an example of an agent. And so I think that's the journey we'll be on. That'll be multiple years, but it's pretty exciting, and it's just a better experience for everyone on each side of the agreements.
And Allan, it seems to me as if making that experience better largely deals with better managing the kind of more tedious component of a lot of the document space, right? The hassle of signing, quite literally the fine print in more ways than one. Is that kind of how you are framing all of this? It's like, hey, you've all dealt with this world. We all know what this is like. We can make all this a little bit easier.
It's absolutely about saving time for everyone involved, not just the lawyers, but the salesperson, the purchasing agent, the recruiter, and of course the party on the other side. And that's super important, and we can do a lot there. But the other part is unlocking the value in agreements, right? There's a tremendous amount of data about, for example, what your customers really care about. Well, they signed that agreement, and so that gives you a lot of information that's not available today. And so extracting that and improving your stance for whenever that's up for renewal, or for when you're selling to a similar customer or buying from a similar merchant in the future, that's example of intelligence. So it's both about workflow, about making things more efficient, and about extracting value and intelligence out of agreements so that you can do things better the next time around.
Docusign bought an agreement management company earlier this year. It's called Lexion for about $165 million. How have you been able to leverage the opportunities off of that acquisition to expand the underlying business?
Yeah, that acquisition has worked out better than I could ever dreamt of. We started looking last fall at thinking, we want to see if we can go even faster in agreement AI for all the reasons we've talked about, right? And we keep close track of all the private companies in the space, and we knew who the top candidates were. And then we did a very rigorous evaluation of who we thought had the best tech and who. And that narrowed it down. Then we did a deeper dive and see whether the customers were eating the dog food, so to speak, and what we thought of the team, and whether their technology products were ones we could easily adapt to our stack, to our software. And all of that led us to Lexion. And so feel very fortunate that we were able to reach agreement with the founders and the investors in the company to buy them. We closed that deal at the end of May. And I mean, in 4 to 5 months, we've shipped 2 major releases with Lexion products as a principal feature. And so, normally it takes a very long time, and sometimes you never get there in terms of integrating acquired companies. I feel really, really good about the job that the Docusign and Lexion teams have done to bring this stuff to life inside of the Docusign suite, and those guys are amazing entrepreneurs. So we're just very fortunate to have them.
Allan, a few minutes ago, you mentioned kind of the impact in terms of maybe easing some of these more tedious pain points for lawyers specifically. And I kind of view the Lexion buyout there as AI-assisted contract review. How else do you see that kind of impacting even the work or the positions themselves for lawyers in the future? And I ask that because, hey, we all know the conversation of AI disruption, what jobs may be kind of phased out or look a little different. And to your point, you mentioned lawyers a few minutes ago. Wonder if you could talk to me a little bit more about that. I really see that as a potentially impacted field for sure.
Yeah, well, so I think absolutely. I think what lawyers do will change. I think the pressure to sort of review things that are fairly predictable, AI can do a very good job of that, so the lawyers can focus on sort of the creativity and human context that comes from judgment, as opposed to just sort of the automated review. Okay, we only agree to payment terms that are 45 days or longer. That's something that an AI could do, and there's no reason that you put pressure on a lawyer to do that. My experience with legal is it's typically a very restricted resource in most companies. You can't apply legal to many things you would like to. And so I think by freeing up, by making all this more efficient, making the workflows better, we're freeing up lawyers to work on the stuff that actually matters and letting AI do the work. And I think the total amount of legal work, so to speak, will actually go up, just as some of it will be done by machines.
How does Docusign and the platform, the IAM platform, kind of manage state-by-state regulations? For instance, in the California court system, businesses have up to 4 years to file a lawsuit if there's a contract breach. Those sorts of rule down, they tend to change state to state. So that's a big hurdle. It's a big challenge for people who finally pass the bar in a certain state, become a lawyer. Obviously, it's one set of rules for one place, one set for another. How do you see that platform helping things like broken contracts? And how do you, as a company, navigate the state-by-state rules, knowing they are so different?
They are. So, and the same is true between countries, obviously, in a more obvious way. The laws are different in the UK and they're different in Germany and so on. What this means is that you have to have training data for each legal domain, right? You can't, yes, a lot of U.S. companies are incorporated in Delaware and their stuff, maybe happens under the Delaware laws, but other contracts are written in the state that the company is resident in. And so there's no escaping that. And so that just means you have to have a much larger corpus of contracts to train on in order to be able to make intelligent answers and predictions about, what to do and what the contract should look like by domain. And this is then that complexity then replicated when you go abroad. This is one of the hidden costs of AI is that everything that's sort of, we say, localization oriented is amplified sometimes multiple times because you have to do that extra work. And people sort of think, well, I just turn it loose, but that's not really the case. You got to get the source data from every domain that you want to cover. So we just released actually this week. We launched in U.S. English initially with that contract extraction tool that I talked about. We released British English, Canadian English, and Australian English, and it's not just about the language, it's also about the legal domain. And then we released German and French. And we got stuff coming up for Japan and Brazilian Portuguese and so on. And those are examples of just the additional work that's required to support different domains. And so there's tremendous complexity there.
Yeah, we mentioned at the top of the interview here, obviously, how well shares of the company traded today after your earnings call, well up more than 20%. Talk to me more about the key subscription drivers in the quarter. What gave you such confidence that the last 3 months or so were as successful as they were? And talk to me more about how you think that sets up the company, not just for Q4 round, but obviously with an eye ahead to 2025.
I think, look, it's hard for me to interpret, the day-to-day movements in the stock, and so I won't try. But I think if we take a longer arc, look, I think the question about I joined Docusign a little over 2 years ago. At that time, we were sort of coming off the COVID hangover, right? We had a gigantic spike in adoption, both one-time use cases and just a general pull forward of demand of people wanting to move to electronic contracting for all the reasons you can imagine, and then coming off that, sort of a deceleration of growth. And so I think a lot of people are wondering, where was the bottom? At the same time, because we'd been so successful, we attracted some competition, companies were getting more diligent about purchasing, and all of that sort of weighed on the company. And so I think a lot of investors were wondering, well, can Docusign ever get back to growth? And is there question marks around their core business? And I think we've answered some of those questions, right? We have shown that we've stabilized the business. In fact, we've now seen our dollar net retention rate, which is sort of a measure of churn, inch up. So we're doing better on that. We're growing in a number of different channels, and now we're starting to see the contribution of our new products. It's still super early, so I hope people aren't getting ahead of themselves, but we're optimistic. I think the early signs are positive, and people could probably tell that was the case. So.
Yeah, and so many of those new initiatives here, finally, Allan, are aimed at removing some of those like we keep using that word tedious, kind of that overhang, those little things that are difficult, and I can't help but be reminded we do a lot of coverage here about what the new look kind of regulatory framework is going to look like in Washington with the new incoming administration. A lot has been made of the Elon Musk, Vivek Ramaswamy, the so-called Doge initiative here to kind of cut some of the government red tape. Do you think there's a little bit of an overlap in terms of what new federal government policy may mean, what that may mean for state policy, and how that impacts a company like Docusign?
Yeah, I don't know that investors are quite giving us sort of forward credit for anything that might get unlocked by that. Look, our projections just assume that things continue on the relatively positive trajectory they've been on. We're not assuming a massive change. To the extent that the new administration unlocks disruption or growth in ways that are cause people to want to contract electronically or assess their agreements again, that'll be good for us. I'm not counting on that, but we'll see where that goes. I do think that on the government side, we do a lot of business with the government, not just in the U.S. but abroad. But we could do so much more, and so we'd love to contribute to making federal, state, and local governments even more efficient.
Yeah, well, you certainly knocked the cover off the ball for the quarter. That much was evident from everyone who followed the share price, and very grateful for your time. That's Allan Thygesen. He's the CEO of Docusign. Allan, thanks a lot.
All right. Thank you, Jay. We really appreciate it. Thanks.